We are, of course, looking at 2 Peter, and we're back into the text of Peter again as we get started this morning over in 2 Peter chapter 2, starting the midway through verse 13. Peter is still talking about these false teachers who are coming in and teaching these ideas about, about licentiousness, about the separation between the body and the soul that allows you to do whatever you want to with your body. And he's talking about the ideas that they teach about angels and Jesus and all the manner of different things that are not simply maybe a misconstruction or a matter of, hey, we could all have different opinions about this. These go to the heart of the gospel in some cases. Because if Jesus isn't the Son of God, then the significance of his sacrifice is greatly diminished. And if Jesus wasn't raised from the dead, if he didn't come and die as a man and suffer the way he had to, and then be raised from the dead as a human being being raised from the dead, then the resurrection has a problem. And if we can just do whatever we want to without any consequence, after our master said that sexual sin all sin comes from inside, then what Jesus said isn't even true. And so at some point, if you start teaching things that are sufficiently off base, you're no longer just in sort of a gray area of saying, hey, we can have different opinions about that sort of thing. You're in an area where you're undermining the core of the gospel, and that's what's happening here with these guys. So Peter goes on, he's got a few unkind things to say about them, let's say. How would you like to be referred to as a stain and a blemish? You're a stain. You're a skin spot that we can't get out. That's what he says. They are stains and blemishes, reveling in their deceptions as they carouse with you. There's this sense of, it's not just that they're teaching this stuff. They're really carrying this out, and they're turning the church into a drinking establishment. Kind of, we were joking on our way here because as Sue and I drove past the house, they had their shamrocks out. And Sue said she got a sweatshirt or something with shamrocks on, or a sweater or something with shamrocks on. And then she realized we're going to be on Thanksgiving, or not Thanksgiving, we're going to be on spring break over this, so she can't even wear it to school to kind of show it off to people. And I said, well, you go down to the bar, and I'm sure they'll be having fun on St. Patrick's Day, because everybody's going to be, drinking and everything. And this is the idea, is they're leading the members of the church into partying and behaving indecently and stuff like that. They have eyes, he says, full of adultery that never cease from sin, enticing unstable souls, which, by the way, this is a smart one, because when you say that, what you're really saying is, okay, these guys are teaching bad stuff, and if you're one of the ones who gets drawn along with them, what are you then? What does he say? What kind of a soul are you? You're an unstable soul. So he's basically saying, look, if you're listening to them, you're unstable. That's not where you want to be. They have a heart trained in greed. They are accursed children. Now, we might today think that that's kind of a funny thing to say, but what does it mean to be a cursed child under the Mosaic law? Not good. What do you do to a cursed child under the Mosaic law?
Put him to death.
You stone him to death, that's right. So this is not a small thing. They are forsaking the right way. They have gone astray, having followed the way of Balaam, the son of Beor, who loved the wages of unrighteousness. We're going to look at him in a minute here. But he received a rebuke for his own transgression, for a mute donkey speaking with the voice of a man restrained the madness of the prophet. So, it's interesting that it chooses Balaam. Because on the one hand, Balaam is a true prophet of God. God did speak to him. That's why Balak, the king of Moab, wanted him to come and testify against Israel, because he believed in the idea that the word that the prophet speaks defines the reality down the road. What we understand is that the reality that God knows is what defines the words that he puts into the mouths of his prophets. So Balak was misunderstanding. He thought if he could get a true prophet to say that Israel was going to be cursed and then Moab was going to be triumphant, that's what would have to happen. But the truth was, if you get a prophet who says something that God doesn't want him to say, that just makes him a false prophet. But Balaam himself knew better, and so Balaam should never have gotten enticed by this, but Balaam was seduced by riches. And these guys, so they pick somebody who is a true prophet, the idea of somebody who knows the truth, and nevertheless abuses his abilities. And that's very much the kind of thing that we see with these guys. They know the truth. You got to know the truth in some ways, at least, in order to deliberately corrupt it the way that they have, and yet they are deliberately teaching false things. So, when we talk about Balaam, The story of Balaam, I think you probably all remember it, at least to some extent, because it's one of the more interesting stories in the Bible, let's say. The elders of Moab and the elders of Midian, they departed with their fees for divination in their hands. So this guy's a prophet for hire, at least to some extent it seems like, or at least they're used to prophesying. They're used to getting people to prophesy for money. You know, you go and hire somebody to tell you what you want to hear, which is not something that's entirely uncommon for us today, is it? What do we have today that kind of functions like this? No, they're not prophesying. They're just telling us what they're planning to do, not what they think the world's going to do. What do we have today that's kind of the equivalent of this?
Televangelists.
Okay, to some extent that's true. Televangelists will tell you you're righteous for money, basically. Send me some money, I'll send you some holy water, and you can, do whatever it is you do with holy water. Drink it, or I don't know, I would not drink it, I'll tell you that. But you can do whatever it is, and you'll be holy. Or send us some money, and that'll plant the seed, and God will love you. And so that's one group of it. But there's something else on the actually has nothing to do with religion, or at least not with Christian religion. Fortune tellers and psychics. You call up these, I've never seen one of those things where they do like the commercials where they talk about how they called the fortune teller. Nobody ever says that I called the fortune teller. They told me that I better get my affairs in order because I was going to die next month. And I was really grateful getting that news because otherwise I wouldn't have been prepared for my immediate or my impending death. It's always and they told me all these good things were going to happen to me, and they did. And it's this idea of paying to hear nice things. And the televangelists, I hadn't even thought about the televangelists look at it, but that's a perfect example too. But we want to hear things that make us feel good. And if that means paying someone to do it for us religiously, we'll do that. If it means paying for someone to do it for us using some sort of hokum and some sort of pagan ritual or whatever, we'll do that. Whatever we need in order to make us feel good. So they came with a feast for divination. And they came to Balaam and repeated Balak's words to him. Balak's words were, "Come and prophesy against Israel for me, and I'll pay you all of this and more if you come and prophesy against Israel." Because Moab is seeing this enormous group of people moving towards and through their territory. And they are afraid of them. And they don't want to have to confront them directly, at least not with the force of arms that they have. And so they want a prophet to prophesy against them because they're hoping that God or a God will intervene on their behalf. So Balaam says to them, "Spend the night here and I will bring word back to you as the Lord may speak to me." So he is going to go ask God what he should say, which to his credit is in fact the correct thing to do. But unfortunately for him, when he asks God, God comes back and says, "Don't prophesy against those people, those are my people." You're not going to be, you can't say anything against them because they're my people and I'm going to bless them. And so now Balaam knows that the thing that he's being told to say, that he wants to say, that he wants to get paid to say, he's not allowed to say it. Or if he tries to, he'll be prophesying falsely. And whatever his other weaknesses are, Balaam doesn't seem to be willing to directly go against the word of the Lord. So he goes back to the elders and he says, "Yeah, I can't do it. God has said that I can't prophesy against them, so I can't take the money. I'm so sorry. I would really, really like to have taken the money, but unfortunately I can't do it." So they go back, and so Balaam continues to try to figure out a way around this. And in the meantime, Balak, I forgot this is the part that I was going off of. God said to Balaam, "Do not go with you, you shall not curse the people, for they are blessed." So Balaam arose in the morning and said to Balak's leaders, "Go back to your land, for the Lord has refused to let me go with you." Well, technically, God could have let him go and just told him to say something different, but God says don't even go with them, because God knows what's going to happen if Balaam does go with him. So God says don't even go with them. So Balaam sends word back, and so they go back, and Balak sends them again. He sent the leader, more numerous and more distinguished than the former, really important people with even more good things to bribe Balaam with. And they came to Balaam and said to him, "Thus says Balak the son of Zippor," that's an unfortunate name, although it wouldn't have made as much sense to them as it does to us now. "Let nothing, I beg you, hinder you from coming to me, for I will indeed honor you richly, and I will do whatever you say to me. Please come then, curse this people for me." Balaam replied to the servants of Balak, "Though Balak were to give me his house full of silver and gold, I could not do anything either small or great, contrary to the command of God." So he seems to be saying the right things. You know, God won't let me do anything. I can't say a word, I can't prophesy without it being what God wants. And indeed, when we get to the prophesying part, it kind of seems like maybe he couldn't do it. He was literally, the ability to do this was taken away from him. When he actually does go and try to prophesy, he prophesies like 3 or 4 times, and every time he blesses the Israelites and curses Moab, and he gets Balak angrier and angrier at him as he goes along. So, on one level at least, God still has control of this situation. But Balak is increasingly trying to find some way to get around this because he wants some of that money. So, eventually God comes to him that night, and he says to him, "If the men have come to call you, rise up and go with them. But only the word which I speak only the word which I speak to you shall you do." So Balaam arose in the morning and saddled his donkey and went with the leaders of Moab. Now, in what Peter has said is he received a rebuke for his own transgressions. Now, what transgression has he committed so far?
None yet.
None yet, at least apparently. But we see as he's riding his donkey, God is angry because he was going. Now, God is the one who said he could go, but God is angry because he's going, and the angel of the Lord took his stand in the way as an adversary against him. So the angel of the Lord is standing on the pathway, although Balaam can't see him, and of course, who can see him? The donkey can see him. And when we read the rest of the story and we read what Balaam actually did, it's actually pretty clear to understand that what God was upset about wasn't the fact that Balaam was going with them in the sense that God had said you can go with them and do what I tell you to. It's that he knew that Balaam going with them was going to that Balaam was going to take advantage of the opportunity to help them in a way that would get around God's command about what to say. And so Balaam is sinning in his planning, and because God is the God of the future as well as the God of now, he knows exactly what Balaam intends to do. And so God is angry because Balaam is disobeying him, not because he's going with them, but he's going with them to do something that God doesn't want him to do, and he knows God isn't going to want him to do it. So of course we know what happens next. The angel is blocking the way, the donkey won't go forward. Balaam is striking the donkey, and finally the donkey is turning off to the sides and trying to avoid the angel of the Lord, because the angel of the Lord is obviously very scary. And eventually they end up in this narrow place where the donkey can't go around the angel, and so the donkey rams himself up, or herself I should say, up against the side of whatever is alongside there and injures Balaam's leg, and he's yelling at it and hitting it and everything, and that's when the donkey actually talks to it. The thing that's so fascinating to me about this whole story is the fact that it actually takes Balaam a little while to realize how weird it is to be talking to a donkey, and because the donkey says, "What are you doing? Why do you keep hitting me?" And he says, "Because you won't, oh my goodness, you're talking." He's so mad. "You won't go the right way." The donkey says, "Well, that's good. In all the time that I have been your donkey, have I ever done anything like this?" I love that. That's some pretty good reasoning from an animal with an IQ of a peanut, right? Have I ever done anything like this? And Balaam says, "Well, no, I guess not." And he says, "Well, don't you think there might be a good reason why I'm doing this?" And that's when the angel of the Lord appears, and Balaam freaks out, And the angel doesn't stop him from going. The angel is there to remind him, you better be careful what you do. Because God is aware of what's going on in your heart. God is scary. We're going to see today in the sermon just how scary the angel of the Lord can be. Because at one point he actually terrifies David. And David was more in sync with God than Balaam certainly was in this moment. So the angel of the Lord is terrifying. It reminds Balaam what he's supposed to do. So Balaam goes with him, and like I said, once he gets there, he tries at least 3 times to curse Israel on behalf of Moab, and every time he fails. He tells Balak, "I'm not going to be able to say anything unless God lets me." But nevertheless, Balak's like, "Well, go try anyway." Well, that didn't work out very well for him, because it just got worse and worse and worse every time he prophesied. So Balak, it seemed like Balak didn't get what he wanted to. But Balaam gives him some advice before he goes back home, and that advice turns out to be really, really problematic. And where we see this at is in Numbers 25, a few chapters later. It says, "While Israel remained at Shittim, the people began to play the harlot with the daughters of Moab. For they invited the people to the sacrifices of their gods, and the people ate and bowed down to their gods. And so Israel joined themselves to Baal of Peor, and the Lord was angry against Israel." What happens is that Moab begins to entice Israel, and in particular, the women of Moab begin to entice the men of Israel. And we actually see a number of examples of this that continue throughout the journeys of the Israelites, where people are being disobedient and they're cohabitating with the daughters of Moab, even though God has said, you're not going to marry anybody, you're not supposed to have relations with anybody who's outside of Israel. You're supposed to, maintain your purity as far as the nation goes. Now, what does this have to do with Balaam? Well, later on in Numbers it says, behold, talking about the same thing, these caused the sons of Israel through the counsel of Balaam to trespass against the Lord in the matter of Peor, so the plague was among the congregation of the Lord. What we can see is that Balaam could not prophesy against Israel because God wouldn't allow him to. What he could do, because I don't know why God let it for sure, my assumption is that the difference is that when you are going to speak the word of the Lord gets to kind of control what you say, whereas when you're going to speak your own words, God kind of lets you do what you want to do. You get to make your own choices, good and bad. He's the one who counsels Balak, okay, here's how you defeat these people. You're not going to defeat these people by going out to war, obviously. God keeps cursing them, or cursing you and blessing them. But if you go and you entice them to do evil, you can get the Lord to turn against them. And that's ultimately what Balaam suggests that they do. And so because of his counsel, Israel is indeed led astray. And so when Peter says that these men, these false teachers, are enticing unstable souls to follow the way of Balaam, or in the way of Balaam, he's talking about this very idea that people who are otherwise on the right track, people who are otherwise blessed by God because they're Christians, they're in a relationship with Him, they've become part of His kingdom, they are being enticed away, and with sexual things in many cases in terms of what these people are teaching, these false teachers are teaching, and they're being enticed away from the kingdom of God and brought down and brought low, just like those Israelites who debased themselves with the women of Moab suffered that same fate. So this is it's one of those things where actually the book of Peter helps you to kind of understand the story in Numbers a little more clearly by the reference it makes, because it forces you to go back and kind of line this stuff up if you hadn't done it before. But we have this notion that there are people out there who they understand what we believe well enough to be able to be very destructive when they manipulate. There's a principle that I still believe in as a lawyer, I still believe in as a teacher. You need to know your enemy. And that is not just a principle that righteous and good people follow. That is a principle, in fact, that people who are unrighteous and evil follow way better than we do. They learn about their enemies. They learn about what other people believe, and they learn ways to undermine them. And so we have to be very careful, because the most dangerous people to us are those who know the most about us, because they have the most ability to lead us astray by warping what we think or by attacking what we believe in ways that we're not really prepared for. So, okay. Comments or thoughts about that? Okay, so let's move on then. So, he's going to continue to insult these guys. He's not done yet. Stains and blemishes and unstable souls and things like that, that was just the beginning. He says, these are springs without water and mists driven by a storm, for whom the black darkness has been reserved. For speaking out arrogant words of vanity, they entice by fleshly desires, by sensuality, those who barely escape from the ones who live in error, promising them freedom while they themselves are slaves of corruption, for by what a man is overcome, he is enslaved. So as we go through this, first of all, I love the visual imagery that he's using here. It's so very, very powerful and very, how many of you can for us especially, how many of you can imagine a spring without water? Right? We have an entire river down in Phoenix that's most of the time a river without water, at least water on the surface anyway. Mist driven by the storm. Think about when you see a wave crash against the rocks and you get that spray that comes up and it just kind of goes everywhere and then just disappears. Visually, these are very striking ideas, driven by that storm, okay? So when we look at this, when we talk about springs without water, Jude had a very similar thing that he said. These are men who are clouds without water, carried along by winds, autumn trees without fruit, doubly dead, uprooted. These guys, they don't mince any words about these guys. But what is the underlying metaphor here? What is the significance of all these different phrases that they're choosing? Springs without water, autumn trees without fruit, doubly dead, uprooted. What is he really saying?
Useless.
They're useless. They're not just useless, though. When you see a spring, what do you expect it to have? When you see a tree in the autumn, what do you expect it to have? Fruit. I actually looked that one up because I've lived in Arizona most of my life, and I didn't actually know for sure, but it seemed right to me. But anyway. So it's the idea that, and I think that's what he means when he says they're doubly dead. It's the idea that it's not just something that's useless, it's something that's useless but makes it look like it's useful. It's the mirage of the oasis in the desert kind of thing, where you're seeing something that you think is good, and instead what you find inside of it is just useless and dead and hurtful. And that's what these people, the impression that these people are giving. Springs without water. So, in Luke, Jesus talks about this, about the kind of water that's really good and the kind of water that's just kind of good, When the woman at the well, I can't blame her for being really confused when she encountered him, because he starts off, and that conversation just comes out of nowhere for her, There's a Jewish man, and she would have been able to identify him as a Jewish man, both from his features and from what he was wearing. It's a Jewish man sitting in a Gentile well in a Gentile area. Gentile woman goes to draw water out of the well, and out of nowhere, this Jewish man, who would never have spoken to a Gentile under normal circumstances and wouldn't have spoken to a woman anyway, says, "Hey, can I have some water?" She's like, "What? What? What? You're talking to me? What? Are you sure? I'm a woman, right? And I'm a Samaritan, right?" I said to say Gentile, Samaritan. I'm a woman and I'm a Samaritan, right? Jews, men don't talk to Samaritan women. I don't know if you're aware of that, dude, but they don't. And he's like, no, it's okay, And she says, why did you come here without anything to draw the water from the well by if you're thirsty? And that's when Jesus launches into this thing about everyone who drinks this water will thirst again. And she's like, well, yeah, that's usually how it works. Whoever drinks the water that I will give him will never thirst. And she's like, you don't even have a way to get the water out of the well. What are you talking about? I mean, this is a very confusing conversation for her, I would think, But the water that I will give him will become in him a well of spring, or a well of water springing up to eternal life. I heard you two talking about water this morning, and the problem that we have. What's the problem that we have in Arizona when it comes to water? We don't got enough. Yeah, we got way too many people for the water that we've got, and we got more people that keep coming here all the time. That's a problem. And unfortunately, that's not a problem with a super easy solution. You could try to make people stop coming. You could try to find some kind of a pipeline from one of the rivers to the east or to the north or something like that. But all of those things are complicated. It's not easy to solve that problem. Water is a precious commodity everywhere, but it's especially a precious commodity in a desert. And that's where most of these people, well, most of the Jews at least had lived, was in a desert or a desert-adjacent region. So they understood the value of water. So Jesus is saying that if you've got my words, you've got a spiritual spring of water welling up inside of you to eternal life. And we know what that is. We understand what we're talking about here. We're talking about the spirit in us that is regenerative of our sinful nature, not regenerated of the sinful nature, regenerates our godly nature and overcomes our sinful nature. We have that in us. But here again, when Peter and when Jude pick these terms, like spring without water, what they're speaking to isn't just the idea of a dead, useless spring of water. They're speaking to the idea that these guys don't have that in them. What's bubbling up inside of them is death and destruction and uselessness, as opposed to the spirit that those who follow Christ have. So there's a very deliberate parallel, I think, that's made in both of these passages here. And then Jesus tells a parable, and this is that parable about fruit, or this is the idea of fruit not growing. So Jesus tells a parable. He says, a man had a fig tree which had been planted in his vineyard. He came looking for fruit on it, and he didn't find it. And he said to the vineyard keeper, behold, for 3 years I have come looking for fruit on this fig tree without finding any. Cut it down. Why does it even use up the ground? And he answered and said to him, let it alone, sir, for this year too, until I dig around it and put in fertilizer. And if it bears fruit next year, fine, but if not, cut it down. Now, who is this parable about in the context that Jesus told it? In the context that he told it? Who did you say?
The Jews.
The Jews. And what is he really basically telling them? Warning them, even?
God
Another year.
You're in the last cycle, basically, get it together, exactly, he's basically saying, you get one more chance. It hasn't been 3 years, it's been hundreds of years, and you keep ignoring this. This is your last growing cycle, and if you don't produce something, if you don't get on the right track with this, you're going to get cut down. But Jesus uses similar metaphors and analogies to talk about Christians as well. The need for his disciples to produce fruit. The idea that he is the vine keeper and that he cuts off vine branches that aren't any good and throws them into the fire. The idea that our power, our life comes from him as the vine. I guess I'm getting the metaphors mixed up. He's the vine, his father is the vine keeper. Anyway, that we are part of his vineyard, and if we're not producing, then we're not useful. And just like the Jews lost their pride, their place, although it's not that Christianity as a whole is going to lose its place, individual Christians who are not producing can indeed find themselves on the outside looking in because they're not being productive. And so here again, this idea of a spring without water or something that doesn't produce fruit is this idea of something that is inadequate for the purposes that it was created for. Inadequate for the reason that you have it. And eventually, you're going to get rid of those. My dad comes from Indiana, and he has never fully accepted the fact that the ground and weather in Arizona is not suitable for growing most of the things that you can grow in Indiana. As practical as that man is on almost every other thing, every couple of years he decides he's going to try to start a garden. And in particular, what he wants to grow is tomatoes. He loves tomatoes. Tomatoes do not grow well in Phoenix soil, I can tell you. And you can bring in soil, you can bring in sod, you can do whatever you want to, and you can try, and your tomatoes are just not going to be very good. To make matters worse, there are a lot of things in Arizona that also think that tomatoes are really good, and they will try to eat them on the few occasions that you manage to grow in it. So he would do that. He does this, and finally he started growing things like jalapeno peppers, which grow just fine in Arizona. But the one thing that he's always tried to grow since the first house, well, the house I grew up in, not the very first house I ever lived in, but the house that I grew up in, we moved in when I was like 4.5 years old, and we lived there for 30, they had that house for 30 years. I, of course, had gone to school and stuff from that point, but they grew these, he planted a grapefruit tree, a lemon tree, and 2 orange trees, and they got enormous. So those at least will grow in Arizona. But imagine, so when they moved, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. So when they moved to a new house, he planted just an orange tree. He didn't have as much yard to do it in. A smaller type of an orange tree, planted just an orange tree. And for 4 or 5 years, it would not have any oranges. It grew leaves like crazy to the point where you couldn't get past it because of the place that it was located in the backyard. My mom kept trying to get him to cut it down. He was determined he's going to get some oranges off that thing. And it finally did start to produce oranges. And now he's got some because he liked giving oranges to people. He likes eating them himself, but he likes giving them to people too, especially his relatives, because they come from Indiana. They can't get oranges there, at least not homegrown ones, so they get all excited. But the point is, at some point, a tree is just taking up space and wasting water if it's not growing things. And what these people are doing is worse than that, because not only are they taking up space and not growing things, but the people that they infect, it's like a tree that has rot or something in it, and that is infecting other trees. So they're worse than just unproductive. They're actually destructive to what's around them. Okay, let me stop and see if anybody has anything they want to say, because I've been doing all the talking here today so far.
I'll just say that there's a lot of scriptures and parables that do talk about non-producing or whatever. And I was just listening to something on 10 virgins, and we teach that as basically there was 5 that were unprepared, but a little bit larger metaphoric meaning there might also mean that that not only were they unprepared, but they didn't have what was necessary to go in, and they waited to the last minute and then went out. And so is that the Holy Spirit? They didn't have that. They were weak, or they just were completely unready to do what God wanted them to do, and they were fine with that until they were stuck outside. So it's amazing how many scriptures do talk about false teaching and being led astray and all of that. So,
Yeah.
now, I'm trying to remember when that Balaam story, when did that occur? At what period
It's
of time?
prior to, I believe, actually, I'm not sure about that. I'm over here in Numbers anyway. Let me take a quick look at this.
Because if they're over in Midian and Moab, isn't that
I can't remember if it's at the beginning of the desert wanderings or if it's the end of the desert wanderings, but it's during the desert wanderings before they enter into Canaan.
see, that's where Moses was from.
Yeah, Moses is still there for this.
Yeah, and that's on the Arabian Peninsula, right?
I believe so, yeah.
It's not the Sinai.
You have to start with it.
This is why I'm having trouble. Let me take a quick look here. So, let's see.
Oh,
So they're done at Sinai after this for sure. So they've gone through and they've gone through Edom.
see, we've been to Moab, and that was in
Really?
Utah.
That would have way out of the way for the Israelites to do that. I don't know if I talk about parting the Red Sea, that would really be something. Now,
I've been there too.
It's not before Sinai.
no, it is before Sinai because Numbers 22 is well after Sinai. So it's well after. Sorry, I misunderstood what you were saying initially. I think that this is. Let me see, because the key is to figure out when it is they get to the Jordan the first time, and I think that's.
Well, we can study that later.
Actually, no. It looks like actually this may be on the second half. So this may be after or near the end of the wanderings as they are now moving towards Canaan to actually cross over. I'm not 100% sure about that, but we get into the Transjordan tribes settling in other words, the tribes that settle on the west side of the Jordan are going to settle that land in just 3 or 4 chapters after this. So that tells me it's probably going to be at the end of the wanderings. And that makes sense to me as well because one of the things that happens because of the situation with the women of Moab is that right before shortly before they're getting ready to enter into the land, there's actually a situation where as Moses is speaking to the people, an Israelite just takes a Moabite woman and just walks right in front of him and goes into his tent with him. And there's one particular, I forget if it was a Levite or who it was, but got a little upset about that, grabbed his spear and just basically stabbed in the tent and killed both of them because it was such an affront to do that right in front of the entire assembly of Israel. So I think that this is near the end of the wanderings, but you're absolutely right. We're no longer on the Sinai Peninsula. We're definitely over either in Arabia or moving around towards the Jordan. They're getting close to that. So yeah, that's what we're talking about. And of course, Moab would continue to be a problem for Israel many years after this, even certainly into the time of the judges before they were finally thoroughly defeated. So what you're talking about, the virgins, I'm reminded of this past couple of weeks here. I've had an interesting situation occur with my classes where I had a test, not this past Thursday, but the previous Thursday.
You need to clear this up, right?
Oh, everything good. We'll put her to work on that. She can figure it out. So I had a test, not this past Thursday, but the previous Thursday, and I tell the students ahead of time. In fact, I posted in their Google Classrooms. I warn them from the pulpit. That's not quite how my class works. I warn them every day in class ahead of the test. If you're not going to be here for the test, you have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of next week to make it up. If you don't make it up by Wednesday, you get a 0 because I'm going to release the test grades to everybody, and that means they're going to be able to see all the questions and the answers they got right and the answers they got wrong. And once that's happened, I don't think you should be allowed to take the test anymore. I don't know why, but it seems like to me that's not such a good idea. So I warned them about this. Now, something a little unusual happened that Thursday that we were supposed to have the test, which was 2 things. Number one, there were a number of kids that were playing athletic events that were going to be gone. Now, that happens all the time, and athletes are expected to make up tests, and they're usually really, really good about doing that. The other thing that happened was we had some boy at the school who was making some statements that scared some people, and that were in some cases, I think, amplified by people and maybe made a little more serious than they really were. The administration found out about it and they began to look into it, and they actually were going to hold him out of school that next day, but there was concern that there might be some sort of violent event. parent got a hold of that, posted on Facebook, freaked everybody out, and a bunch of people decided to keep their kids home on Thursday. Which, you know,
The principal didn't help.
well, there's certainly some opinions about that. And the point, though, is that my perspective is I'm given a test, everybody understands the rules, and there's lots of opportunities to make it up the next week. As it turned out, I actually took Tuesday off last week, but I was still going to be there, and you would come in before school Monday, before school, after school, during lunchtime, Monday, Wednesday, or even before school on Thursday, which I don't normally do, but I figure I can wait to release the grades until the last minute right before class starts. So there are 7 different times that you can come in and take the test. And I had already announced those times even before even before the weekend, even before the test took place. And I sent out an email to the students who specifically missed the test, just to them, saying, you missed the test, these are the days you can make it up. I'm not going to be there Tuesday, but Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, these are the times. So, I mean, a lot of kids missed that test. There were probably 40 kids across my classes that missed it. 22 of them came in and took the test during one of those various times. 17, one guy decided he'd take it at home, which you're not allowed to do, so he got a 0 on his own. But the rest of them didn't take it. And and every day, that's this past week, every day I announced in class, you know, you've got to take the test. If you've got an email for me, you've got to take the test. You've got today, you've got Wednesday, you've got Thursday morning. Then I did it again on Wednesday. And then on Thursday, I didn't say anything, because why say anything at that point? It's too late. What happened is all these zeros went in. Now, I had a bunch of kids contact me when they missed the test, either because they were out athletically out, or they were out for some other thing, or because their parents had held them out. And they're contacting me saying, what do I do? And I'm saying, here's the times, here's the dates. And they're saying, I'm going to come in, I'm going to come in. And all the ones that contacted me came in and took the test. And none of the ones who didn't take the test ever contacted me. Until when, would you guess? When did they all start contacting me? Thursday. That 0 shows up, and in many cases, because we're fairly early in the semester, that cratered a bunch of people's grades. They dropped at least 1 grade level, and in some cases they went from C's down to F's even because of that. And there was also, by the way, some other homework that was graded over that same weekend that some of them hadn't submitted either. Things that they should have done a week before and they didn't do. And so several people went from C's to F's, and so I had a lot of people coming and saying, what do I do now? Well, nothing. You're stuck. You got nothing to do now. You can keep working hard and get your grade back up by the end of the year. Well, a couple of those people that were coming in are athletes. If you have an F grade for more than about a week, you can't play. And they're real freaked out, you know, but the thing is, they had the same notice, and all the other athletes, you can bet, all the other athletes were really careful to make sure they took the test, because they know you can't afford to have that happen. So this is very much that kind of a thing, you know, we're not paying attention. And that was so funny, is a lot of those kids are like, well, I didn't know that was the rule. And I'm like, really? You know that's the rule? Even though I said it every day in class, even though I sent you, I posted things in your Google Classroom, I sent you a personal email, and a follow-up email when I realized I wasn't going to be there on Tuesday, reminding you of the time. You didn't realize that was what I was expecting. No. Well, how did you not realize it? I guess I wasn't paying attention. I guess you weren't, you know? So now you're paying attention to me. That's great, except it's too late. You can't fix it now. And so there's a lot of kids who are really upset and really unhappy. And I'm a little unhappy, but also kind of quietly enjoying this just a little bit, because some of those kids need to start listening to me a little more carefully. So, you know, but there's that lack of preparation never seems to matter to some of us anyway until the consequence happens, until it's too late, and then we realize it, and then we're trying to make it happen in time. And sometimes we can get away with it, and a lot of times when it's really important, we can't. And that's why ultimately the lesson that I've taught these kids may be more important than most of the history that I'm teaching them, because they're going to forget a lot of that. I have no illusions about that. But they may hopefully learn something about accountability from having, you know, consequences that are negative that they have to deal with. So anyway, okay, so he says, springs without water, he says, mist driven by the storm. And like I said, I really like this particular metaphor, because it's that idea that there is water there, there's something of value, and then it crashes against the rocks and it just dissipates, you know? If you ever stood by the seashore and had like sea-carried winds, you know, where you see the water coming off, the spray coming off the ocean, you know, usually at least, it's kind of a gentle sort of it just gently kind of wafts over your skin, and then it's just gone. It's like it was never really there, you know? Now, occasionally it doesn't work. You can always see those fun videos on YouTube where people are taking pictures on rocks too close to the ocean and they misestimate where the tide's at and they get swept out, you know, or knocked down or something. And those are fun to watch, by the way. But in general, that's the reality is that the water that comes and hits against the shore like that just kind of dissipates. And when James talks about people who aren't really thinking and aren't really paying attention, he says, if you lack wisdom, you should ask God, who gives to all generously and without reproach, and it will be given to you. But you must ask in faith without any doubting, for the one who doubts is like the surf of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. So there's this additional aspect to this, and the additional aspect is not only is there really nothing there, it's kind of going away, but it's also just being driven by forces that are beyond its control. You're not making decisions, you're not making choices, and God is certainly not running the show. You're just going wherever you feel like going. You know, so if you don't have faith, or if you doubt what you're doing, then you aren't really giving God the ability to step in and control, because you don't have that faith. And the same way, these false teachers, they are driven by what? What is pushing them? Is it God? No. So what is pushing them?
Their own pride, their own desire, their own wants.
Okay. They're human instinctual desires. That's what's driving it. So what I want, what I desire, what I'm lusting after, the money that I want to get, whatever it is, they're being driven by whatever those things happen to be, and they're just going wherever those things take them. And so James says, the man, and this is just talking about doubt, that man ought not expect that he will receive anything from the Lord. I don't know why the 8's in there, I think I forgot to take the verse number out. Being a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. There's that unstable again. When you're following after something that isn't God's will, you're just going to be all over the place. Because there's no real focus. You know, how many of you ever had too many things going on in your head and it made it really hard to get any single thing done? I'm guessing most all of us, if we're being honest, can raise our hands to that. I was actually struggling with that this weekend because I'm trying to figure out what to do about all of these kids that missed this test and whether I'm going to actually give them a 0 or give them some way to at least improve their grade a little bit. And it's been bugging me for days now. And I finally came up with a solution last night while I was at school working on grading something else, and that kind of smoothed things out for me. But I did the sermon before that, and it took me a long time to get through a sermon that I had already planned out pretty clearly in my mind because I had so many things that were pulling my brain away from thinking about the sermon. So when we are not focused on what God wants us to focus on, there's all these other distractions. How many of you have seen the movie Up? The guy who makes the balloons and takes his house, and it's a Disney Pixar movie. Yeah, it's a great movie though. I mean, if you're an adult, especially adults who either lost a spouse or as you're getting a little older, to watch that movie, the first 10 minutes of that movie are both awesome and incredibly depressing. It's just an interesting combination. But there's a scene in there, the dogs that are in that movie, there's a bunch of different dogs, there's one thing that distracts all the dogs in that movie whenever it happens. Anybody know what it is?
Squirrel.
It's a squirrel. When it says squirrel, all the dogs stop and they look around for the squirrel. Human beings are like that. We don't need squirrels. It's just everything is like that. You know, money, you know, car, you know, guys are like that one, that big one, you know, that you can get in a wreck real bad if a really expensive car drives by and you get a little too distracted by it. But we're like that. We get distracted by all the things, all the shiny things, all the pretty things, all the expensive things. Whatever it is, we get real distracted by those things unless we're focused on what God wants us to focus on. And that makes it really dangerous when we have false teachers who come in and say it's okay to focus on those things. It's okay to think about those things and to make your life be about the pursuit of those things. And so many televangelists, so many preachers today in a lot of these community churches and just in general, in a lot of churches are telling people it's okay to chase after those things. That's what God really wants for you anyway. That's what it really means to be fulfilled as a Christian, is to have all your dreams and desires taken care of by God. And that's not at all what the scriptures teach us, of course, but that's what we're being told. And it's seductive because when somebody who is speaking or presumes to be speaking or pretends to be speaking on God's behalf is saying it's okay, we're saying, well, sure is what I want. Boy, that makes a lot of sense to me. You know, that sounds really good. And then we start leaning that way. And it gets easier and easier as the more we see our society, which we have long tried to say is a Christian society, looks more and more that way. And we start to think, well, if Christian society looks that way, it must be okay to be that way. You know? All of that logic is backwards. Because all of that logic begins external to God and then tries to apply his rules to God that will make him fit what we want it to be. And what we know is that God is the creator, God is the maker, God is the one who defines the rules, and so everything has to conform itself to him, or it is indeed useless. It is indeed illusory. It is full of death and destruction rather than something that's useful. Any comments or thoughts? Betty?
You have to tell us what your solution was.
All
You
right.
can't end without telling us.
Okay, I can't
Right on
even
the curve.
Homework.
What's that? Well, not exactly. See, here's the problem, okay? So here's the biggest problem with giving them homework. I would have to read and grade that. and so this is, I mean, this is one of the things I'm thinking about. What I could have done was given them an essay exam. But do you really, how much do I really want to read 16 essay exams, you know, on a test that I already gave 2 weeks ago and I was done with 2 weeks ago? I don't want to grade that. I don't want to do that. That would take hours of my time. Why should their failure to take the test turn into hours of my time? So, what I decided to do was, the rule that I have in my class, because a lot of students struggle with tests. I never struggled with tests. I had trouble sympathizing with them the first year I was teaching. I mean, I knew it was a problem, but I didn't really understand it, because I've always been really good at taking tests. And so I didn't understand the problem as much as it existed. But I came to realize is a lot of kids really struggle taking tests. They get freaked out. So what I do is something called test corrections. So if you take a test in my class, any questions that you get wrong, once everybody's taken the test and I release the grades back, they can see their grade. They can see what did I get right, what did I get wrong. Now, it doesn't tell them what the right answer is for the ones they got wrong, but at least they can see what they got wrong. And their job then, if they want to make up points, is that they can take, and I have a test correction sheet. It has 2 blanks, it has a series of two columns with blanks in them, and they can write out the question that they got wrong, and then they have to write out in full the answer that is the correct answer. So they can go back and then they can look at their notes, they can look it up online, do whatever they want to. I don't care how they find it out. But they can go in and they write those 2 things in there. And if they do that, I give them half credit for the questions. So what this means is even if you bomb the test, my most recent tests were 50 points. So even if you bomb the test, even if you got a score like 10 on the test, that would mean that you got 40 points wrong. You could get 20 of those back. That would end you up with a grade of 30 out of 50, which is not a great grade, but it's at least a D on the test. So very few people get only 10 out of 50 on my test because they're open notes, so it really shouldn't be that hard. But nevertheless, so this is the system that I have set up. So what I have decided to do with them, and this year in particular, we put into place a new practice in the social studies department where because we have several teachers teaching the same material, and we want to make sure that students are learning the really core important stuff, all of our tests are divided into 2 sections. Core questions that we do all together, and general education, or general knowledge questions that we individually put on there based on the specific kind of sub-things that we teach. So in this particular test, there were 15 questions that were core questions. They were worth 2 points each as opposed to the 20 questions that were worth only 1 point each. So for those 15 questions, what I'm going to let these students do is I'm going to let them come in, and so they didn't take the test. First thing they're going to do is they're going to take a test with those 15 questions on. Get it right or wrong or whatever. But whenever they're done, they are then going to use the test correction sheet to write out all of those questions, all 15 questions, and the correct answers to all of them. So if they got it right, great, they can just copy that down from the test. If they've got it wrong, they're going to have to go through and research and figure out what the right answer is, because if they don't get the answer right, they won't get the points. And for some of them, the difference between 1 or 2 points could be the difference between going from an F to a D or staying in an F. So they're going to, but the other thing about this is they're going to get to come in and do this after school. Because I'm always there after school working on some stuff. I've got a number of things to do this week. I can already see ahead of time. So they're going to get to come in and do it after school. That is going to be the only time that's available to them, anytime this coming week. And so we'll see how many of them are willing to give up their time to actually come in and do this. But it will take them a while. If it works the way I think it will, and I could be wrong, I've made mistakes like that before, if it works the way I think it will, it's going to take them a while to do that. So they're going to give up a significant portion of their afternoons in order to come in and actually fix this. And even when they do, it's only going to raise their grade enough to get the ones who were, dropped down to an F, get them out of failing, but not by very much, which is also going to mean they're going to have to take my class a little more seriously for a while, because if they don't, they'll be right back in the F again. So that's my outcome, my way to approach this. So the trick that was trying to figure out is how do I get leverage to make sure that they keep working and don't just use some kind of an out that will get them right back to doing whatever they want to do again. So if I'm going to give them an opportunity, and the problem is I've got a number of kids who missed the test who are really good students who I think just kind of screwed up, and I don't really want them to have this impact. I'm not so worried about the ones who never listen, but if I'm going to give some of them a chance, I want to give all of them a chance, so I'm kind of put in a situation where I've got to figure something out. This is the best thing I could come up with. So we'll see how it goes. I'll tell you next week, kind of how it turns out, because I'm sure some of you at least are going to be really curious. So anyway. All right, thank you guys for being here. Let's take a break for 10 or 15 minutes.